Hey guys, welcome back to the Orthodox Squad. Today we've got our friend Bojan joining us, and he's going to be interviewed by Milos and I. Usually he's paired with another Milos, but we've kind of got a replacement for him, and we're going to just get him to introduce himself for those that aren't familiar with what Bible Illustrated does and what it is. Bojan, what do you guys do? What's your aim with the channel?
To answer invites to podcasts.
Do podcasts. And I noticed that you do a lot of drawing on those podcasts.
Oh yeah, I do. No, my basically my goal is to illustrate the entire Bible in this sort of Orthodox style. That's the primary goal, and the secondary goal of the YouTube channel is to literally showcase Orthodoxy to a wider Anglophone audience. That's the gist of it.
So basically, today we're going to be discussing the topic of controversial saints, and who doesn't like a bit of controversy. We're going to go
and who doesn't like a little bit of saints?
See, we got both here today. So we're not going to go through every single controversial saint in the history of the church, because I don't think we have time for that or you have time for that. We're going to pick a few and go through them. But before we do that, let's talk about the process of canonization. In general, we as Orthodox believe that you have to be inside the church to be a saint. That doesn't mean that you're not in heaven, but it means that to be recognized as being in heaven, you would have had to have died as Orthodox. Could you elaborate on that, Bojan? How do we get canonized in the church? What are your thoughts?
Well, essentially, how things should go in general is that there should be a popular cult of the saint. That is that person, he or she, is considered a saint by particular members of a church in an area, preferably for a prolonged period of time. Once that cult is established and generally affirmed by miracles, but not necessarily, the person is canonized by the local synod of bishops, which basically means that bishops can dedicate churches to that saint. There is an established feast day. A service is composed in their honor. There is an official troparion and catechon and all of the other related hymns, and so on and so forth. In some cases, there are no miracles. Sometimes it is miracles that actually prompt the veneration. For example, I think that most people know about Saint Ephrem of Namakri and Saints Raphael, Irene, and Nicholas from Greece, for example. Here in Serbia, we actually have three saints. I can't remember their name. One of them is named Saint Seraphim, who were martyred by Turks and whose relics were located by this pious woman after a number of visions. So, sometimes God literally intervenes to reveal a saint, and that can affect the process. And of course, for a lot of early saints, there was no official canonization process, and they were simply accepted as is by the church in general.
I think that was very concise. And were there any saints that started off as being controversial and then later became widely accepted? Because I can think of, for example, with Saint Seraphim Rose, I know there's a whole group that doesn't really like him so much at first, and now he's kind of becoming more widely accepted.
Yeah. Actually, that's something I noticed. Like when I started going online, there were sort of three waves of who converted people to Orthodoxy. Initially, it was Father Alexander Schmemann with his book For the Life of the World. Then slowly, Callisto Swear's book, The Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Way, take the primate, but now it's Father Seraphim Rose. So it's interesting how that goes in sort of ways as culture shifts.
I also noticed that for some reason, those that are trying to I think it's very apparent at this point in time that Father Seraphim Rose was a saint, but at some period, those that were trying to force it onto other people have a tendency to be very radical in how they think, and those that wanted to completely reject him had a tendency to be very liberal in how they think. And it's funny because Father Seraphim Rose actually wrote a book on the royal path and staying on the royal path, which is not going to either extreme. And I find it pretty ironic that his own, the events leading up to his own canonization kind of revealed people that were going too far to the right and too far to the left. For those,
actually, it's finish, please.
That was it.
You probably know about the horseshoe theory, and radicalism is not even good even in the church. And as Father, for the longest time, I really did not like Father Seraphim, precisely because of his fans, because it was like this. People who were his fans, I really disliked, but every quote of him I ever read was simply stunning, amazing, and it did not describe his fans, but that shouldn't come as a surprise, because if you know the fans of Saint John of Kronstadt, they were insane. They were utterly insane, to the point where Saint John himself anathematized them. I hate saying that word in English. Sometimes people will gather, sometimes problematic groups, and occasion these sort of fandoms will go into run-of-the-mill Orthodox Christianity. Sometimes they will persist in their extremism, but as we know, and as church history has shown us over and over again, no extremism is a good thing.
That's a very good point to make, because we're actually going to talk about some saints that would be considered extreme for some people. I think the first one I want to go with is Olga of Kiev. Very obvious example. In her early life, she was kind of very, violent. That's the best word for it. She sent like birds with bombs attached to them to people that she, a whole village.
Birds on fire. It's not that bad, okay?
Well, it was basically bombs with birds. I mean, okay, birds probably burned, but it was essentially bombs on birds. Worms Armageddon.
And basically, she ended up being accepted as a saint by the Universal Church, and I don't think there's any group of Christians that holds to the idea of saints that actually rejects her. So why do you think that is? Why was she sainted despite that?
Well, this is an interesting topic to discuss, but we need to make a difference between a historical person and the lives of the saints. And this is something that a lot of people might disagree with me. But lives of the saints are a very special category of writing that tends to emphasize, the spiritual qualities and so on, sometimes at the expense of historical reality. I have actually read the official life of Saint Olga, and if you read it, you would find just a little of real historic Olga, in the sense of the way she's described. She's described as this saintly pagan boatwoman who was very chaste. Even in her pagan days, she was full of good deeds, and that is why God elected her. But there is no mention of how she dealt with the murderers of her husband. And from what I could see, those murders occurred before her conversion. So, for me, Saint Olga is absolutely a non-issue. If somebody denies her sanctity because of how she dealt with those murderers, and it was a bloody murder, you're essentially denying the salvific power of repentance. And I think that church is at least a little bit in the camp of, okay, these people, they've done some very questionable things, but in the end, their service to Christ outweighs it all, there is something I will say as regards to that when we discuss Saint Constantine.
Yeah, as far as I know, most of those bad acts that she did was before her conversion. She got deeper into the faith.
Yes.
And for the things that she's highly remembered for in the church was her work for the Orthodox Church, with spreading their faith to her people. That was one of the main things she ever did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's precisely the thing, and basically, even though she herself did not convert a whole lot of people, those few she did convert resulted in Russia becoming the Orthodox nation we have today. So I think that is something that all of us can appreciate, even if you're like the most rabid Ukraine supporter. You can still appreciate what she did for Russia, Ukraine, and Orthodox and Christianity at large. And I don't know if you know this, but she also invited Western bishops to proselytize in the land. And the reason for this is not really known. It is assumed that she wanted perhaps to include an element of competition between sort of different Christian factions, but one might wonder how much she knew well the nuances between, at the time, Eastern and Western Christianity, which were still spreading quite large. So
I'd like to imagine she knew somewhat of it, but she also was like, it's very similar.
Yes.
And
because there was no split. Christianity wasn't split. That's in the Western half Christendom wasn't grafted out at that time.
Yes.
So
it was just cultural difference more back then.
Yeah.
Well, there always was a bit of a power struggle between well, at least after the council with Saint Photius, there always was a bit of a struggle between West and East, between specifically Constantinople, their influence in Rome, which continued during that period. So to say there was no tension would be a bit dishonest. Yes. There was, but they were still part of the same church, and were influencing each other.
Yeah.
And it's funny because at the end of the day, she still received the honorific equal to the apostles. Her title as a saint is equal to the apostles. And like Bojan was saying, if you want to deny the sanctity of Saint Olga of Kiev, then you really have to deny all the apostles. Not all of them. You have to deny a lot of the early saints and a lot of the early apostles, because, for example, with Saint Moses the Black, he was a murderer and a thief. It's the worst of the West. Saint Mary of Egypt was a prostitute. You know,
same thing.
So yeah, I completely agree with you. It's a bit of a non-issue because people are changed by the Holy Spirit and the power of repentance, and that's what the church teaches anyways. So for you to deny the sainthood of Saint Olga would be to just deny the fundamentals of your own belief system.
Precisely.
Another one that I was going to bring up was actually, we'll go for one Demos likes a little bit. It's Saint Christopher the Doghead. So for those of you watching, he's often portrayed in icons as having a literal dog's head. Like, I'm not speaking metaphorically or figuratively. Like, here, he's literally got a dog's head in the icons. And people say that because they believed at that time that there was actually a tribe of canid human hybrids, that's just a made-up figure that they invented and then sainted him to say that they preached to the dog people. No. Can you elaborate, Bojan? Who was sainted?
Well, both of you are probably aware of the two versions of his life. One where he's like a brigand trying to serve the strongest man alive. And initially that was sort of, the devil, until he finds out about the Christ. However, there is the Eastern version where he is a literal member of a dog-headed tribe who accepts baptism, and from what I can recall, he becomes an ordinary human being after baptism, if I can recall. I don't think he remained a dog-headed person after baptism. And it's really interesting because sometimes, there is a way we paint icons. For example, if somebody was a monastic, we will of course paint them in a monastic tonsure. But sometimes, for example, this is the case for practically all of Serbian kings, all of them died in monasticism. However, very rarely are they painted on icons as monks. That is the case for Saint Simeon the Mirgusher. But for others, they're generally painted as kings, precisely because, you know, they're mostly known as kings. And it's sort of similar with Saint Christopher, who, okay, yeah, he's a martyr, but he was a dog-headed person. And I don't know, that is what I said. That is the case of, like, maybe a life of a saint becoming tad more embellished, you know, because if there were dog-headed people, you know, or the historical records of them, where was the, you know, and that also begs the question, if there were half dog, half man, that means that they weren't men. And if they weren't men, how do you baptize them? You know, there's a lot of implications of that life. And okay, let us assume that aliens come to Earth. And by that, I mean physical beings, not like visions. You can touch them. They're not demons. They're simply, and they're sentient. Can you baptize them? Because you, Christians of old clearly thought you could baptize a dog, you know, dog-headed person. And in Scotland, I believe they even had a sort of this folk saint of like a holy mermaid who accepted Christianity and so on. Those stories are rare, but they do exist. So their implications, I think, would be really interested to, you know, investigate. What are your thoughts on Saint Christopher?
There was even
yeah, definitely. Like, Carl,
you
go
go,
ahead.
Ross.
You can go first.
All right, I was just going to bring up that there was a Saint Guinevere who was actually venerated by local French people. He's not even half dog, half human. He was a dog.
Yeah.
That never passed local veneration stage, thankfully. Yeah. And it was pre-schism anyways, but it just goes to show that people had a different mindset at that time, I guess.
Yeah.
We
do know he was the goodest boy.
He was the goodest boy.
Actually, there's a story. There's a story when these seminarians from Montenegro went to Jerusalem, and they returned to our metropolitan Amphilochius, and he's like, "Oh, what shrines did you see?" And they say, "Oh, your eminence, we venerated the tomb of the donkey Christ rode into Jerusalem." And he's like, "Of all the places in Jerusalem, you venerated the donkey." And there's like this, not really a joke, but like an exchange that in like Serbian monastery, like these two nuns are approaching the icon of St. George, and they're relatively short, and the abbess says, "Oh, mother, take care that you do not venerate the horse," and the other is, "Oh, take care, abbess, that you do not venerate the dragon." But you know, like, creation sings to the Lord, so dogs and donkeys and what have you.
What was that? There was this saint that says, "Go out and preach to every creature." I can't remember who the saint was, and I might be getting it out of context, but I do remember there was a saint that said literally just go out and preach, not to all the nations, but to every living creature.
I know that was a story from the life of Anthony of Padua, and that he literally went and like preached to fish. I'm not certain if there's like a parallel to that event in Orthodox Church. I can't remember at this time, but I know that, for example, St. Justin Popovich would preach in an empty church. He would say like, "It is my job to preach. It is their job to appear. I'm doing my part." So
I also know that there's like a biblical verse, actually, it's eluding me right now, that says, "Therefore go out and preach to every creature." Give me a second, I'm going to Google this. So, right.
Well, Christ says, "Baptize all nations."
Mark 16:15. Let's go to the King James Version. And he said to them, "Go into the world and preach the gospel to every creature." Is that who wrote Mark? Mark wrote Mark. So
Yeah. Well, you know, you can try, but
I just think they had a different mentality back then, at least.
Well, yeah, I would say so. I mean, not really into like baptizing cats and dogs, but still.
Yeah, of course. And I know that the church essentially teaches that there's two kind of sentient beings. There's angels, which were made to be the guide to man, and men, which are the pinnacle of creation. But is there anything else either of you wanted to add on Christopher the dog face?
Yeah, I have a nice story. So, you know, I was familiar with this icon like for a long time, but recently, even though I've been a lot of times to that monastery of the Theotokos in Lescia, I never realized that when you go into the chapel in the church, right on the left there is his relics in an icon. They have like his underjaw.
Nice.
And interesting enough, on every icon where they have like relics inside, there is usually like some glass over it as protection for the relics. But on this icon there is no glass. So I venerated his icon directly. And my dad was with me. And he saw that and he was like a bit confused, like he called me over silently. Did he really have a dog head?
You said that the relics were the lower jaw, so did he have fangs?
No, he did not. It was like normally human.
There you go.
The teeth were still there. Most of the teeth, 4 teeth were, I think, still there.
There you go. Well, that answers that.
Yeah. No, because in the time he was like described as very white looking and dog-like from the tribe. Because
actually,
they were described as wild, strong, and tall looking, and you know, like a dog, like strong.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from.
Yeah, actually, I heard that interpretation. That actually, what it referred to his dog-facedness is how the wild the tribe was, not actually like that they were half animal. Maybe in like developmental sense in a way, but
yeah. So from his description here, we could say his face was probably more like very wild looking, maybe some scars, and that's why maybe they refer to it as dog-like.
Yeah.
I mean, the depiction apparently came way later, like 500, 600 years later, where they depicted him with a dog head.
It would be interesting to know, like, how the history of his life developed. You know, maybe
history. Speaking of history, how history developed. I think a good saint that we could bring up is Saint Peter the Alouette. It's another type of saint that I think. So we've gone through violent saints that looked weirder than we think they did or might not have. Now we're going to talk about saints that might not have existed at all. What if they? Okay, so I'm going to bring up Saint Peter the Alouette. We believe that Saint Peter the Alouette did exist, and that's what the church teaches. That's what we believe. How do we deal with claims where someone comes and says, "Oh no, he might not have existed," and how does that affect our faith, Bojan?
Personally, it wouldn't affect my faith one iota, because I do believe that he existed. However, I would like to mention a different thing that probably did not exist, and that is the wife of Diocletian, the Roman emperor, who supposedly converted after witnessing the martyrdom of St. George. However, that St. Alexandra never existed. He never had a wife who was called Alexandra. He never had, much less like a convert. So, and I think that it's especially prevalent with like ancient saints. But even then, it's still rare. However, there is this story, and you guys probably know about it, about this simple-minded monk who thought that Ascension was a female saint. So one of his brethren, he lived on Mount Athos, and one of his brethren was ill, and he expressed desire to eat fish. And this simple-minded monk went to the kitchen and said like, "Oh, Saint Ascension, please send my brother a fish," and a fish flew in from the window right on the pan. And I do not believe that these kind of stories, I do not believe that even if there is a non-existent saint that somehow ended up in a calendar, I do not believe at all that prayers to these saints are somehow wasted or something. However, with Saint Peter the Aelud, I do believe that he's real, absolutely. So I do not believe it is such a major like stumbling block or a strong argument against anything, honestly.
He's a bit of a Schrodinger's cat of orthodoxy. It's like an unanswerable stream of questions. Basically, the story goes is that he was captured by Jesuits and he was sent to what's now Los Angeles, and the religious or government officials who were Catholic threatened to kill him unless he converted to Catholicism again. Well, not kill him. They said, renounce your faith and become Catholic. And he refused. And then eventually they basically tortured him, and finally they eviscerated him. That's the story. For those of you that aren't aware, I do find with this one that a lot of the people that do deny his canonicity aren't Orthodox. They're actually Catholics.
Yeah.
And that would make a bit of sense because, look, I don't think you can really use it as any leverage here, because obviously bad people do bad things all the time. Doesn't matter where they belong to. But I think we need to be, I don't think that's a reason to deny something that happened to get off the hook.
Yeah.
In general, I just find that people that deny his existence happen to be Catholic. That's all.
Yeah.
With Saint Peter, how do you deal? Okay, so how do you kind of flesh out the idea that maybe the church has canonized someone incorrectly or even non-existent, and have your faith remain intact? Because if you believe that the church is governed by Christ, right, that has certain implications on your faith. How do you deal with that, Bojan?
Well, the reason we have a canonization procedure at all is because people started venerating different heretics, especially heretical martyrs. So I think that the church did recognize that popular veneration can lead to mistakes. And I do not believe that canonization procedure 100% eliminates these mistakes, but it eliminates 99.999, absolute majority of them. I do believe that the church is governed by Christ, but I also believe that we cannot force infallibility. Like, for example, somebody kills somebody and we're unsure of the facts. But if we gather all of the bishops of the world in one place and they agree whether that man is innocent or not, that is a sort of an infallible decision. I do not think it is a whole lot different from canonization. Yes, we do have canonization in order to prevent future mistakes, and there is due diligence, but sometimes I believe that even this process can, and very rarely does, in some mistake here or there, but again, I do not believe it is a scandal in any way. To myself, to somebody, it might be, because that is, well, if Saint Peter wasn't real, then like domino, how is God even real? But for me, it's not. For me, it's like, if Saint Peter isn't real, that domino falls, and that's about it. For me, it's not a scandal. Again, I do believe he was real. I do realize why people deny his historicity, because it is a bad look for the Catholic Church, and so on. But for me, it is a non-issue.
Okay, so we've gone through saints that might be extremists, saints that might not have existed, saints that might have had details exaggerated, like Saint Christopher. Now we're going to go for a bit of a niche one, and I had a bit of a chat, all of us, before we started the video about Saint Isaac the Syrian, and I think I actually want to bring him up. So, those of you...
Oh, look at the time.
Well, Saint Isaac, the controversy that surrounds him is that there's a lot of claims that he was not Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox. And if you think about it geographically, it kind of makes sense because he was a Syrian. How do you deal with that, Bojan?
Because he was a Syrian or Assyrian?
Same thing.
You know, I've seen people trying to defend that he was what we would call today Eastern Orthodox. But, you know, those defenses to me always seemed like that meme, like mental gymnastics, you know, bending over, rolling through the flaming hoops and everything. And, you know, there is a story about Saint Paisios the Athonite wanting to build a chapel to him, and he checked the Synaxarion, and there he realized that he's not actually listed as a saint. And he was very much sorrowed because he realized that Saint Isaac wasn't actually canonized in the Orthodox Church. And the next night, Saint Isaac appeared to him in a dream, and he said, "I fought all those heresies." Now, if we take this story to be true, the most I can accept was that he was, you know, covertly fighting the heresies, or did not subscribe to them, or did not really particularly care for those debates, because I did read his life from, again, St. Justin Popovich, and he was ordained by an Nestorian patriarch. And you might say that personally he disagreed with that theology, but he was still factually a part of a church body that at that time was separate from the Orthodox Church. And I'm, of course, by the way, if anybody disagrees with me and can prove it, I'm 100% willing to change my opinion on this, and as on most other matters. However, for me, again, personally, this is not much of an issue, because he's still widely recognized by the Eastern Orthodox Church as a saint. That's one. And second, sometimes there are these fringe occurrences in the church, and I like to list the story of Saint Cleopatra and Saint John. Saint Cleopatra was an ascetic woman. It wasn't Queen Cleopatra, for those of you in the back. And she had a pagan son who died. Mind you, he was absolutely not interested in Christianity. He wasn't a catechumen. He was 100%. He was 100% pagan. However, she went to the grave of a martyr, Saint Varus, and she kept praying to the martyr to save her child. And she had a vision of Saint Varus taking her son to the kingdom of heaven. And today, Saint Cleopatra is commemorated together with her born pagan, died son, Saint John, who we consider as a saint on account of her prayers. So when you think about it, when we have, for example, that story, having an odd fringe bishop who really contributed to our asceticism in our own church isn't really, you know, too much, you know, an issue. Of course, somebody may say, well, why don't we canonize Francis of Assisi then? Well, because we made a mistake here and we are not going to repeat it, but we're going to put up with this one. I'm not advocating for removal of St. Isaac from any calendar, from icons and so on. His contribution
Also,
is great, and I would leave it at that.
With St. Isaac the Syrian, I know the sources, a lot of the sources that attributed to him writings were not actually his own, and the historicity of his entire life is much harder to look through. That's why we're even having this discussion. Whereas with Francis of Assisi, we know 100% he was Catholic saint. There's no ambiguity. There's no doubt. We know what writings are his and what he believed. So I think that makes a distinction between those two. And like you said,
and it's an important distinction.
And there's a big difference, I guess, between knowing beforehand and knowing afterwards anyways, that this person was not in communion with the church. Because if it was the case that Saint Isaac was not Eastern Orthodox, the people
Mm-hmm.
that commemorated him as a saint were clearly not aware of that fact.
Yeah, precisely. And you simply I think that one of the big issues, and that is like the percent of every debate I've seen in the Orthodox Church on the toll houses, on how to receive the converts, on whether Saint Isaac was an Eastern Orthodox or an Nestorian saint. People believe that the church is this monolithic structure where everything goes by the rules and everything's always the same. It's not like that. There's a lot of spectrums all over. And I think that we would have even much more if we had much more much more members. I have to get a glass of water. I apologize. I'll be right back.
No worry, take your time.
Now, back to the content we were talking about. So,
I wanted to emphasize, church isn't as monolithic as it seems. It is when it comes, for example, to like dogma, the really important teachings. However, on some things, it's a huge spectrum of interpretations, approaches, pastoral issues, historical developments, personalities, different saints, and so on and so forth. And that is why Father Peter here usually says, follow the saints. Which saints? Like there's a lot of them, and sometimes they speak in unison about certain things. Sometimes they really do not speak in unison about some things, and that does not even account the actual practice of the church, and so on and so forth. It's really all very complicated, and we bishops and priests and clergy and church hierarchy are really trying their best, led by the Holy Spirit, to keep the ship afloat. And because it is led by the Holy Spirit, it is why it's kept afloat, despite of these little nuances. If maybe we have possibly canonized the wrong saint. In the end, it doesn't, to quote that church hymn, in the end, it doesn't even matter, So,
do you know,
mm-hmm.
I find our whole, this is what I really like about our ecclesiastical structure, is that you're not, like I said, there's been informal schisms since the very inception of the church. You see that literally with Saint Peter and Paul themselves have an argument in the Bible. There's been informal schisms. I don't think there's ever been a period in the church's history where there's not been an informal schism. Now, a schism only becomes formalized when you have a complete severance from the body of Christ. See, and with our ecclesiastical structure, it accounts for all these nuances and all these human behaviors. The Holy Spirit guides the church to reach the agreement that kind of is overarched by Christ himself. And
precisely,
you can't expect people themselves to act like they're perfect. And by having this ecclesiastical structure, we are safeguarding ourselves. We're maintaining the communion, even though two patriarchates might be arguing at some point in time, like Greece and Russia. They're arguing right now, and they've been doing it on and off for quite a while, too, as well. But these issues get resolved over time often, and if worst comes to worst, who's in the wrong because they've been severed from the body of Christ. And that's why I appreciate our ecclesiastical structure. I think, yeah.
I would like to, for example, the schism between the Serbian Orthodox and Macedonian Orthodox Church. It lasted, I don't know, 70 years, something like that. I can't even remember how long. And there was no resolution in sight. And that expression, botched milk never boils, or water, I don't know what's in the original. For me, it was like that. Like, you're watching, and then you turn, the season one is resolved. What, how, where did that come from? Like, you sort of like blinked, and in that blink, they sort of resolved everything in like 2 days. And what happened here? And thank God, for me, that's a greater miracle than somebody raising the dead. But we have this church body that had its status completely unrecognized by anyone in the whole Christendom. Like at one point, they tried, sort of, I think, to even get some sort of recognition from the Pope, and the Pope was like, no. However, thank God it got resolved, and we have this meme going around in the Serbian Viber groups, like, find a man who looks at you like the Macedonian clergy looks at the mosaics in the Temple of St. Saul. My headset is falling apart. I apologize.
Okay, it's fine.
But it is so true. It happened so quick. I still get messages
Yeah.
from time to time in the server that we're in. If they can go to a Macedonian church, they're like, "Oh, I accidentally went there." And I'm telling them, "No, it's okay now." What? When? Well, last year. But when did they announce it? Yeah, they announced it, and then like 3 days later, it was already done.
Yeah, it was precisely like that. Like, how did that happen so quickly? And thank God, but
I think it was like, if I remember correctly, how that happened last year, it was like the patriarch in Constantinople contacted them. And they were like, no, we will continue our discussion with the Serbian patriarch. And then like a week later, all right, we are back together.
Sorry, I had to, like, ecumenical patriarch. No, don't message your ex. No, we're back together. But thank God, you know. Now we can make memes out of it.
So I think one of the final questions I really wanted to build up to was, when we're discussing a saint that might be controversial, how do we be intellectually honest with ourselves and strike a balance between critically analyzing fairly the saint and what the claim is, and respect for our faith and the traditions of the church? How do we strike that balance? That's my question.
Okay. Well, for me, I believe that for absolute majority of people, the best and the safest route is simply go with what the church says. If the church says it's a canonized saint of the Orthodox Church, go with it. And I would leave it at that. You know, I might have personally some different approaches, but I would not want these approaches, you know, to be out there, because again, some people might misuse them or something. So I think that would be preferable.
Yeah.
Miloš?
What do you think, Miloš?
I agree with if the Orthodox Church says it's canonized, there is no mistake in following the Orthodox Church for you as a lay person. If you just what's the word? Listening to when I tell you something.
When you're obedient.
Obedience, yes. Just be obedient, and if in doubt about something, go to your spiritual father and just follow his commands. Is that the word?
Yeah. Well, his
no.
Oh man. Just do what he says.
My battle with English will never end.
At some point you will struggle with it no longer.
I think that like, you know, any controversy, at the end of the day, you just might be wrong. Maybe this church maybe what the controversy was about is completely misguided, and then you cause an issue over nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's very solid advice. So we've gone through all major kinds. Obviously, like, think of these as for you guys watching, think of these as subtypes. We've gone through saints that might be extreme, saints that might not have existed, saints that had exaggerated claims about them, and saints that might not have been Orthodox. We've gone through 4 different subtypes and gone into detail on each one and how to approach it. So if you see a saint that's controversial and fits into any of these categories, just apply the same kind of logic to that saint.
Oh, you missed a big category. For example, a saint that believed some heterodox teaching.
Okay, how do we deal with that? Which
For
saint?
me,
Are you talking about Gregory of Nyssa by any chance?
For example, precisely.
So.
For example, and I believe that the teacher of Arius is actually a saint. He was martyred, and there's high probability that Arius got his teachings from him. So, but that's a bit of a guesswork. With Saint Gregory, it's much more clear. Again, I would reiterate the previous advice. Simply go with the church. You know, if the church says that universalism is rejected, then it's rejected. And you know, I will go, oh, Saint Gregory was a heretic or something. No, he was loving. He wanted all people to be saved. That was his honest, ardent desire. You know, even in such a heresy, there is this loving core that needs to be preserved, and I think that is what he ultimately believed.
I've heard a lot of explanations for Gregory of Nyssa. A minority of scholars kind of say he was a hopeful universalist, or that he's being misconstrued. Whatever you think about him, it's still, the idea remains that a saint is not infallible about every single topic. Forget Gregory of Nyssa. Let's go with for example, Saint John of Chrysostom versus Saint Augustine clearly did not agree on everything theologically, right? Does that mean one of them is not a saint now? No, of course not. See, a saint is someone that is not a saint, someone that we can say their teaching is wrong, and because of that they cannot be a saint, is someone that's been had their error rectified by the church and still adamantly refused to give up their erroneous teaching. There's a big difference between teaching error in truth, as in you're unaware of what your teaching might be false, or you're just giving your thoughts on the topic, and someone that knows the church doesn't teach that but still teaches it anyways, or the church come in later and said, no, you're wrong, and they're like, no, I'm actually right, you're wrong. Big difference.
And also, for example, I know that people sometimes criticize Tsar Nicholas II, Romanov, like he was a weak emperor, like not even weak, but a bad Tsar. Personally, I have no issue with that at all. You can be sort of a failure in secular matters completely, and still be completely filled with Christ. So for me, I mean, in Serbia, Miloš, you know, we have an emperor who's literally called Uroš the Weak, and he's a saint. I mean, that's a really you know, jarring attribute to have. But his father, who had the epithet of the strong, well, it was very difficult to keep up with him, and you know, you can't really blame the son for not being able to uphold the juggernaut that his father left him. So you know, it's even more complex than he simply being inefficient.
Yeah, definitely. He was in a bad spot at the time. A lot of problems in the empire, and compared with his father, I think 80% of humanity would have gotten the nickname the Weak.
Like maybe even like 98%, honestly. And people, you know, society was in the bad shape at the time of reign of Tsar Nicholas, and we can, you know, divine and how complex it was. Rasputin did not help things. I mean, he did help the Tsarevich, but not the not the society at large. So, and sometimes society moves in a bad way, and that's why we have the royal passion bearers.
I always like to say Tsar Nicholas got dealt a bad hand from the beginning.
Oh yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of things he could actually have improved in a significant way. Of course, in a small way there were some stuffs, but it would have been really tough to improve it significantly.
You know, I like to think about Saint Elizabeth and Saint Alexandra, how everybody hated Alexandra and everybody loved Elizabeth, even though both of them really tried like to become pious, to practice their faith, but for some unknown reason, everybody hated Alexandra, and everybody loved Elizabeth. Sometimes it's really not what you do. So
yeah, for those watching, you don't have to. Okay, you can be a saint, as in heaven, and not have the church officially recognized you. There's plenty of saints that the church doesn't. People in heaven that the church has not officially canonized. That's no issue with this. This is what the church teaches.
Exactly. We often say there are so many saints that we are not aware of, even nowadays living among us.
Yeah.
But maybe we will never find out about them for some or the other reason. But it's still okay.
I honestly believe that every elderly person who's been in the church for a long time can personally attest to like maybe 2 or 3 saints they've witnessed the funeral of in their own parish church. I'm next to positive about this. Next to positive. So, however, God only deems some with relics and, widespread veneration. So.
Exactly. And as we are already off the topic of that, known and unknown saints, that's why I really like the writings of Saint Nikolai Velimirovich. Also, when he wrote in the song that he wrote with the victory song.
Oh,
this
Orthodox
makes my heart mellow.
Christianity.
I don't know how to put it another way.
Actually, my favorite version of the song on YouTube, my other Bible-illustrated partner, Milos, actually is part of that choir.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. That song in the Temple of St. Savad, while it's still unfinished. And also, you also mentioned a controversial saint.
True. When I read a lot about him, and I was like, I can see some arguments, but his writings are so good.
But sometimes what we write and what we practice does not align, and what we practice sometimes is even better than what we write, and that's the case of Saint Nikolai.
Yeah.
I've met some people that they try to force all the saints to be saying exactly the same thing, and it's just like mental gymnastics. I've met multiple people, Orthodox. They say all the saints have never made a mistake. They all agreed with each other.
No. Like, so no.
Big time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why people, I simply assume that it's sort of easier to think of, again, this great infallible monolith, but that's not how reality works.
All right. Well, I think on that note, before we end the video, I want to ask, do you have any final things you want to say, any plugs you want to put, any books you recommend on this topic?
Read the Lives of the Saints. No, honestly, I mean, the Lives of the Saints are my go-to thing when my religious practice takes goes for a decline. The Lives of the Saints always pick me up, and because that is what they're about. They're really about how you can be filled with Christ the way those saints were. And of course, the methods will be different. You won't go around with chains. But that spirit is still there, and you can still profit from it, even if you're not a bishop that's getting martyred. But that spirit, you can't have that spirit.
I think that's a great last note. That is Carl, Milos from the Orthodox Squad, and Bojan from Bible Illustrated signing off. Thank you, viewers.
Next time we will do an episode, Carl will learn how to pronounce our names.
Yes, sorry, I'm not Serbian, so I have a bit of difficulty, but they will teach me. So next time,
it's okay. We've only been friends for 2 years.
Only. I'm sorry, man. That's how we said it in Australia. That's my excuse for everything now.
No. Listen. I disagree. There's no need for you to learn our names, because I think that even Christ himself will start off the Last Judgment field. Well, first of all, how to pronounce my name correctly. So, I mean, honestly, none of us does it. So why should I bother if somebody mispronounces my name? They're not mispronouncing it. They're pronouncing it in their own language.
Australian.
That is true as well.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Undo on everything I've just said. What's up with the Orthodox Australians constantly inviting me to their shows?
You're pretty popular here. I wanted to ask, so how do you actually say it? How do you say it?
Bojan.
Bojan and Miloš.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know how to actually say your name, but I say it on purpose. I intentionally say your name incorrectly just because it's funny.
No, feel free.
I'm kidding.
It sounds funny. I have to admit that.
It does sound funny. Bojangles.
So that's Carl, Miloš, and Bojan signing off, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you, guys.